the fastest line, like point from A to B is a straight line, unless there's a bunch of obstacles in the way. Sometimes you need to smash through those. Most often, circumnavigating them is going to quickly get you to B. And it's kind of an approach I always took with athletes of like, what do I need to be successful? Not what is the perfect model, what is the perfect support system or the perfect physiology, but how do I make the most of this situation? I'm a big fan of you need to have a deep expertise, a long T in your field of expertise to really add value to any team that you come into. If you're trying to work with some of the best athletes in the world, just being a generalist is not enough. I released a program, totally for the bros. It's called Ultimate Chest. And it's got 2 great chest days, highlight like things. You hit it from every angle. You feel like Superman coming out of it.
Hi there, and welcome to the Supporting Champions podcast. Now, my name is Dr. Steve Ingham, performance scientist by trade and training. And in these discussions with performance experts, practitioners and performers, I explore how we deliver performance, how we support others to perform, and the underpinning knowledge and concepts at play. I really hope you enjoy the conversations from today's episode or from the back catalogue. And if you do, it'd be great if you can take a chance to like and subscribe to the channel, or for the audio, take a moment to leave a review. It really helps the show. Right, let's get into the discussion.
All right then, folks. Well, welcome to the Supporting Champions podcast. Now, today I'm joined by Troy Taylor. Now, Troy was a physiologist practitioner at the Welsh Institute of Sport, then high performance director at the US Ski and Snowboard, and now he's senior director of performance innovation at Tonal. So he's been there and done it, supporting athletes, leading teams, and now pioneering the personalized fitness space. A very warm welcome, Troy. How are you?
I'm doing exceptionally well, Steve. Thanks for having me on. I really appreciate it.
It's been a long time since you graced the halls of Sophia Gardens at the Welsh Institute, eh?
It's been a few years. I was there. I think I left the end of 2009, so 15 years ago of watching some cricket while getting some lunch.
And your step from there as a practitioner role, did you transition into? Actually, I tell you what, give us the sort of. I've given a bit of a brief bio, but you fill in the sort of details of what's missing there, please.
Yeah, I do the abbreviated, or try to do the abbreviated version. Undergraduate degree in sports science, went into personal training, health club, realized that wasn't for me. Thought I'd do a P teacher, tried doing that like as an assistant before kind of going back and did a PGCE. That wasn't for me. So like basically ended up, I was like, well, I need to find something. So I went back, did a master's degree at Loughborough. We probably crossed paths. We're talking early 2000s-ish.
Before my Loughborough time,
somewhere around there. While I was there, British Swimming had just kind of started up their program. I got to volunteer for the British swimming team, which would have been Commonwealth Games in Manchester and then Athens Games, just as an intern collecting heart rates, lactates. Did that. Because I got some practical experience, got a job at University of Birmingham straight out of that, supporting some university athletes, some EPL academies, some British track and field athletes for Athens. Did that a couple of years. I wanted to do something different. Went to the US as a 24-year-old to work for US Ski and Snowboard. Been skiing twice. Team physiologist. Traveled extensively, 200 days a year with the Olympic team for the Torino Games as a physiologist, mainly a bit of an assistant strength and conditioning coach. Went back to Wales as a senior physiologist, and then after then got recruited to Canada as a director of sports science at the time for a small institute at the time in Toronto called the Canadian Sports Centre Ontario, that became the Canadian Sport Institute Ontario. Spent 6 or so years there, fortunate to sort of coincide with the Pan Am Games that were in 2015 in Toronto. So lots of facility builds and resource investment, built the team from a team of 10 to a team of 60, added a medical department, and then, got recruited to come back to US Ski and Snowboard a decade after I'd left, almost, as the high performance director running the Olympic team for Pyeongchang. I did that for close to 6 years. And then, got recruited to come over to the startup corporate fitness technology performance world.
Yeah. Okay. So a number of transitions there. That's super interesting. Can I ask you about the changes that were needed for you to go from practitioner to leader?
Yeah. I hope my team would agree that I've worked with over the years. I think I'm a better leader than I ever was a practitioner. I think I
Okay.
was a good practitioner. I think I tried to apply science and build relationships with coaches and athletes as best as I could. I'd say that my career really took off was actually when I was at Wales. We started working on this 2010 to 2016 sports strategy, and I got roped in by kind of above my pay grade in some ways, but I loved looking at long-term strategies. How do we put things in place that are not paying off even this quad necessarily, but a couple of quads available and systems and structures, and that kind of really sort of blended well there, and then sort of started doing the human resource management of individuals, and I really liked bringing practitioners together, and that's actually when I think my career really went from being I'd been to some Olympic Games, I'd done some good stuff, I'd been really fortunate and both strategic and fortunate in sort of progressing in my career, so I'd done quite well, but it's actually once I made the transition to leadership that my skill set fitted with the role that I was being asked to do, and so that was relatively easy for me. It was actually harder probably to not fake, but somewhat fake imposter syndrome being a world-class physiologist.
Right. Okay. So you could shed that quite happily. Is that what you're saying?
There's a little bit of that. I was like, yeah, sometimes I definitely felt like there's rooms where I was with much smarter physiologists than I am, and in terms of doing that. And so certainly I'm still in rooms with leaders much smarter than I am, but certainly it was an easier fit for me personally.
Interesting. And so we get a lot of practitioners, coaches, leaders listening to the podcast. What message to practitioners would you give? Having led sports through numerous Olympic cycles, what would your top tips be? Having done both, but I think the origin of the question is, once you go to that leadership space, you'd never sort of see practitioner roles and responsibilities and skills and outlooks the same.
Yeah, I think for practitioners, just so I understand the question, practitioners breaking into the field or practitioners looking to go from being an individual contributor to a leader?
I'm going to say both, because I think it's very easy. No, I won't, that's a leading comment. Both. What do you need from the support team that are around you? What are the kind of the key skills and behaviors that you need?
Yeah. I'm a big, both as a practitioner as a leader, I'm a big expert generalist fan. I'm a big fan of you need to have a deep expertise, a long T in your field of expertise to really add value to any team that you come into. If you're trying to work with some of the best athletes in the world, just being a generalist is not enough. You do have to have deep expertise to be able to elevate the conversations. But I am as much, it is not to be a full-time integrated support team member, not just a consultant that's brought in for a project. To work full-time in a practitioner, you have to have a wide breadth of knowledge to be able to have good discussions and constructive discussions with psychologists, physiologists, nutritionists or dietitians, medical practitioners, athletic trainers, physical therapists, sport coaches, whoever it may be. But I'm a big fan of building your breadth. So I think I firmly believe the best practitioners that I have worked with and the best teams that I've been have more T-shaped employees than probably true just individual expertise. Lots of consultants that bring in computational fluid dynamics. I don't need you to be T-shaped. I just need you to know how this wind tunnel data or this mapping data works out. But if you want to be full-time, I think that's essential. So it's one, you have to have the knowledge to be able to have constructive conversations. And then number two, you've got to have a desire and want to have constructive conversations. I will, invest in a curious mindset to try and understand different practitioners' perspectives. Having the breadth of knowledge, let's say in physical therapy, for example. I am not a physical therapist. The fact that I know very little about it, but I've tried to know, means I can have constructive conversations to understand that a bit better so I can bring people together. And I found that, number one, you have to have the knowledge to do it. Number two, you have to have the desire to do it. And I think if you leave either of those, I think that's And that would be whether it's sport coaches, like those communicate, like embed yourself into the sport, understand the sport and those types of things, or whether it's fellow practitioners. I think those are my two biggest things as individual contributors. I think you need to have that from an elevation when people are transitioning into sort of, whether it's head physiology roles or like, support team lead roles and kind of things.
Yeah.
I think you take those same skill sets. I think the people that I've seen most successful in that are the ones that just build this super tight relationship with the head coach, the head sport coach and kind of things, and really become eyes, ears, thought process and mind meld with them. And as long as they have the right human resources skills, that if you have this depth and breadth knowledge that have been good at building relationships, as long as you can build that from have some of the tougher conversations that you might not have to have as an IC, as long as you have built that, if you have a really strong partnership with the head coach, I think that's where it really clicks.
You are very welcome on the Sporting Champions podcast. We're talking about expertise, talking about breadth, talking about key relationships. So that is the juice that we talk about there every week, I guess. I mean, but it's so essential, isn't it? And we hear it time and time again, as much burnished by those experiences of when it's not there. And when it's not there, there's a problem, or there's difficulties, or there's inertia in getting people the stuff they need.
Everything just becomes like a slog, right? You're moving through molasses to try and get to the outcomes when it's not there, and when it is there, it's smooth, it's easy, it flows, and I've led teams that have been in both places. I've been part of teams and led teams that have been where it's felt easy and we've clicked and everything's like we're all jamming, we're all on the same plan, everything's working. And that same team, when it's gone off the tracks a little bit, like,
right.
A quad goes by, an Olympic, like things, the same individuals are there, but it doesn't feel quite as right. Everything's hard then.
Super fascinating. So, US ski and snowboard, my assumption is they're quite diverse in terms of their approaches. What are the kind of key challenges that you've encountered in leading both sports well?
Yeah. So to give context for those that are not intimately involved with US Olympic sport in particular, US ski and snowboard is like 50% of the US Winter Olympic team. They send approximately 200 athletes to the Olympics. 100 of them come from US ski and snowboard. It wins 75 to 90% of the medals, or gold medals.
I don't know whether the Brits have ever sent 100 athletes to the Olympics.
It's a big team. So there's 200 athletes on the on the team, either like the World Cup level or slightly below, 4 to 8 years from Olympic Games kind of thing. And it composes almost basically 10 different sports. You've got alpine skiing, cross country skiing, ski jumping, Nordic combined, which is cross country skiing and ski jumping. And then you've got like mogul skiing, aerial skiing. Then you've got, free skiing, which is like slopestyle and halfpipe. Then you've got that for snowboard also. It's big and diverse, both in what the like physiological needs and technical tactical needs of athletes are, and also like history and culture. Alpine or cross-country skiing, very old, traditional, generally out of European kind of, long histories of that. Lots of European coaches in the system and kind of there. And so there's this very sort of, history kind of component to it and way things have been done for decades. And then free ski came into the Olympics in 2014. Snowboard probably, I want to say, I should know, 2002, maybe it was Salt Lake, was maybe 98. 98, I think, was the first snowboard Olympics. Relatively new, very much US has dominated those for many years in terms of that. And the types of people and athletes and their makeups and the coaches and the systems and coach education is just dramatically different. And I will say not better or worse in either, just very different. And I think that's the biggest challenge at US ski and snowboard, is having a single team identity and culture, but these very diverse and separate kind of like things that do not spend much time together. While they're still under the umbrella of US ski and snowboard, they will only compete at the Olympic Games is the only time they will ever be in the same venue at the same time. And even then, one is in 1 week and one might be in another week. So they never really cross paths. And so doing that, so lots of work, particularly after the Pyeongchang 2018 Olympics, which I would say were like a solid B- Olympics, 15 Olympic medals. B-. So it's not terrible. 15 Olympic medals from one NGB. But like it was a B-. We should have won based on, shoulda, coulda, woulda. But based on stats and a bunch of kind of, statistical analysis, we should have got closer to 20. And then we identified, along with the US Olympic Committee, I think one of the ways that we could really struggle was this overarching identity of like something bigger than myself and committing to that, and whether it's US Ski and Snowboard or Team USA. So lots and lots of work around bringing those people together more often, both coaches for sharing of knowledge of like, hey, like our free ski coaches approach training to very different to an alpine coach, or I say ours, they're free ski coaches, in terms of like much more independent athlete not driven, but like certainly informed. Like if self-determination theory, if autonomy is a key part of motivation, which I think it probably is, like free ski has autonomy like dialed in. What are we working on? What do you feel you need to do? I notice this, but like, what's your input? Whereas alpine's a bit more traditional, particularly till you get to the very top end, where it's a bit more coached down, top driven, less autonomy about what's going on today necessarily. I wouldn't say it's exclusively, but like that's certainly the way it gravitates towards more of an Eastern and Scandinavian sport kind of history. And so there's sort of these basically bringing opportunities to bring coaches together and athletes together more frequently to expose opportunities for learning and cross-pollination between them.
Oh, wow. So super interesting. I mean, I guess the nearest neighbor in terms of that complexity would be track and field.
Yeah.
In that the sprinters are very different species to the endurance runners and the throwers, the heavy throwers, jumpers, for example. They're different creatures. They're different mentalities. They might live in the same block, or they might work on the same training camp or the mountainside, but they have very different attitudes.
Or both on track and like in a track and field thing, but that's kind of where the similarities start and stop.
Yeah, okay. And interesting then that perhaps there might be a smaller overlap of the Venn diagram around knowledge in terms of what determines success, but equally what you're fostering there is a culture of, I guess, sharing different approaches. This is what the way that we attack it. And I guess as much as anything, that probably breaks down some of the vulnerability, just that sense of openness to be able to talk through how people are approaching performance and get that discussion going amongst peers.
Yeah, lots of work around concepts of psychological safety and of opening up. We identified in that sort of post-Olympic review, one, we needed this culture beat, and number two, we felt a unique competitive advantage. No other really Winter Olympic national governing body is this amalgamation. They're kind of, if you go to the Norwegian, it's Norwegian cross-country skiing, Norwegian alpine skiing, Norwegian things. Like you look to the best in the world and they're all separate. And we felt our unique competitive advantage is actually we are this melting pot. We can learn and bring in there. We'd run projects with like Cirque du Soleil in the past. So we'd been like looking outside of our sphere for, say, free ski and snowboard. One of the things I think like it's a really fortunate place when you are best in the world. You have to, yes, you should be looking inside your sport and see what other people are doing, but you certainly start then opening up your horizons to what do the best people in related fields do. And so for our free skiers and snowboarders, we'd run partnerships with Cirque du Soleil. So we they jump, twist, flip, perform at a very high level all the time, consistency and things like that. So we'd run camps with those. But we really in that post-Olympic period looked at like what can we foster internally to do this shared knowledge? And there was a lot, like 2 years of before we really saw it gel, of bringing people together, getting people comfortable. This is a safe zone. You're not being judged because you do something differently. Doesn't mean that you can't do it better. It's not that you are perfect, but this is your approach. Like getting everyone to share that. One of the big things was like sending head coaches on camps with another head coach just as an observer. So
Right.
like send a head snowboard coach for a 2-week camp with the alpine team and vice versa, or with the cross country team, to just observe how do you set up practice? Like, what does that look like? What does your after action reviews or debriefs look like? What's your engagement with athletes? How do you manage your team? Just lots and lots of that. And it's slow burnout. I'm sure it's still going on now. Yeah, lots of effort around that, because we felt that was a competitive advantage, that no one else has this access to these other sports like we have.
Yeah, that
And
feels.
then I will say the high performance team, the science and medicine, they actually become a real important part of cross pollination, because
Yeah.
high performance teams kind of always work really well together. Like, they're easier to work together than other sports. So two strength and conditioning coaches that work in opposites, they're kind of sharing stuff naturally. So that became a vehicle that we leveraged a lot.
Oh, I can imagine that also, if they're seeing the coaches doing that, that role models, that interaction and overlap of ideas. I can imagine that for the top coaches, that's supportive, in the sense that I think often for the head coaches, the top coaches, it's isolated. You're on your own, making decisions all the time, with this pressure of producing results. But if you've got somebody on the same level that you're able to share ideas with, or insecurities or ideas, I can imagine that's quite an alleviation of a lot of stresses.
Yeah, I think so. I think they would like the ones that really leaned it. Like anything, there's a
Yeah,
spectrum of people
course.
that like, nah, this is how I do it, and kind of thing. Like, it's 110 coaches, I think, US ski and snowboard approximately, and there's the spectrum of them. The ones that really want to lean into that, and I can name like 10 or 15 off the top of my head, that like they made partnerships and bonds with other people that like transcended just even whether they still work for the team or not. These are people that they are now in their circle of people to kind of bounce ideas off or problem solve and challenge, and others that were probably less things. I don't want to say it was all perfect, and it's everyone adopted it, but certainly I think having that from a head coach perspective is super useful, and from a practitioner perspective, I think that was always there naturally. And actually, one of the things we did was just notice how it worked in the high performance team and want to recreate that more in sport coaches.
Now, I could take all of our remaining time up talking to you about that, I think, but I'd love to explore your current role, and I'm curious to know how it started as much as anything, and how you found the transition to the corporate environment. I wonder if they heard about that PT course you did back in the late 90s and they just thought, hey, this guy's equipped. But how did it happen? How did you move from ski and snowboard to Tonal?
Yeah, so it started when I was at ski and snowboard, primarily because like trying to find competitive advantage. High performance director, my job, my entire purpose, I got to run sport education and development system, but a large portion of the role is helping athletes as best I can get on Olympic podiums. In the US, while there is the US Olympic Committee that does, give significant funding, there is not the same level of government funding that exists in Canada or Britain. There's no UK sport, no own the podium type kind of environment. And so you have to be a lot more entrepreneurial. There's a lot more foundation, like individual philanthropy and donors. And so when I came back to the team, Troy Flanagan, who was the high performance director before me, who's at the Milwaukee Bucks as VP performance, been there ever since he left, so close to 10 years, which in the NBA is unheard of, I think. He and Andy Walsh before him had been very like technology on edge, like the edge of, they were always pushing boundaries in there. I think Troy Flanagan's, maybe that was the role. I had to have the name of Troy to take the job, but Troy Flanagan's, like, I think his PhD is in like rocket science or something. He's, undergrad in physiology, PhD in rocket science. And so you're like, okay, well, we've got this really technology sort of leaning edge. How can I like take that? And so one of the things I identified pretty early was we have Silicon Valley in America. We have startups. We don't have the government funding, but a competitive advantage is I have hundreds of relatively well-funded early-stage startups that are looking for proof of concepts, are looking for product market fit, are looking for advice, looking for endorsements and credibility from a halo. And so I started working with a bunch of early-stage startups to try and help get athletes on the podium. So back in 2015, just after I joined, we started a project with Striver, which is a a virtual reality sort of 360 video. So we filmed all the Olympic classes in virtual reality. No one was doing that back then. Become fairly standard practice in alpine skiing, learning the courses because you don't get lots of time on task. We ran projects with TDCS, transcranial direct current brainstem, with a company called Halo. We basically started running, and I started running all of these. We had a sponsor at the Olympic team, Comcast, very large, Comcast, NBC, they own Sky Sports, big company. They started or wanted to start a sports accelerator. So early stage investments and how do we help them? I'd worked with them a little bit, and they asked me to be sort of like a founding partner of that kind of project in this early stage startup. So like, what would be of value? How do we think about this? How do you approach problems, etc. And so I kind of like made this over the 5 or 6 years I was there, where I was spending more and more time in the startup world and the technology world. And then I had a board member or a philanthropy investor, a foundation board member at US Ski and Snowboard, who was a board member or board advisor and investor in Tonal. And he was like, hey, this was in 2019. They're doing some pretty interesting things. You should get a Tonal. And I got one, ended up, it was right around the pandemic, gave it to Michaela Schifrin, installed it in her house, tried it shortly after, loved it, and sort of kept conversations going. And about a year later, March 2021, they're kind of like, hey, we're starting this performance team in this startup. You should think about coming and joining. And so found a bit more about it. And I was like, I was looking for what would come next. I think 2 quads is kind of about the limit. It's not my limit as a high performance director. I think I've given everything I can. I don't have any more ideas. I was aware that I probably wouldn't be staying in my current role past the Beijing Olympics. It came about a year, 18 months before then, but I was like, okay, well, I was looking for the next thing. And this seems like a really interesting, I love the product, and it's a really interesting challenge.
This episode of Supporting Champions podcast is sponsored by Athlete Now, the perfect platform for sports practitioners looking to expand their reach. Whether you're a sports scientist, therapist, or coach, Athlete Now helps you showcase your expertise, connect you directly with athletes, and grow your business. With no ads, no commissions, and access to industry discounts, it's designed to make your services stand out. Join as a practitioner today to get listed, promote your services, and connect with athletes who need your support. And for athletes, it's free to sign up, giving you access to exclusive discount deals and direct connections with the best in the industry. Visit theathletenow.com to find out more. Wow. Fantastic. I love that. And I love the, as you say, the entrepreneurial aspects of that you have to be thinking about how can I best support these athletes, and requiring you to reach out to companies rather than, and I can imagine, again, there's a lot of cross-fertilization and filtering of different technologies. Super interesting. Now, I'd love to ask you about this fascinating piece of work called The State of Strength. And if you're okay, we'll include the link into the show notes. It's collating a massive pool of strength training data, but without getting into like an advertorial space, maybe for Tonal, but that's quite difficult to avoid.
I won't ask you to do that. I'll pay for that advert on Sporting Champions.
Well, tell us a bit about Tonal, because I suppose that's important for people to know, to understand how this data collection is possible. And you can also tell us why the hell it isn't available in the UK yet.
Yeah. So, a couple of steps. Tonal, like what really excited me before I get into it, what really excited me about coming everything is Tonal is the mesh between hardware, software, content, massive data, and performance. That's like it's closed loop system in there. What is it? It's an entire gym that fits on your wall with personal training. That's kind of like, what if I was going to think it's the thing that's behind me there. And so it's a dual stack cable column. Arms come out and wide. You can do 250 movements. It creates resistance, not via, iron or mass, but via electromagnetic motors. The simplest equivalency would be, it is the Tesla to or the electric car to the combustion engine car. It creates it creates energy in a different way, and much like actually with a Tesla or something like that, you can manipulate that resistance in ways that you can't in traditionally ways. But the thing that really got me jazzed about it is that the combination between all of those, but particularly that like big data. Obviously, anyone that's been in the sports science and supporting world for the last decade or two, we've been accumulating and amassing more and more data and trying our best to understand it and implement it and draw insights from it. But in most Olympic sports, in my experience, it's still the actual data is not that big. If you do have a lot of data, it's on very few individuals. I might have GPS data at whatever hertz for my first 11 soccer team or football team or whatever, but I don't have like masses. I don't know everyone else's data and kind of things. Or I actually in something like skiing or snowboard, it's quite challenging to grab a lot of data and high fidelity data. Essentially, what Tonal does is every time any of the members lift, it collects force and velocity data at 50 hertz. So it's like a linear position transducer in that, but it's also collecting and manipulate the resistance. And the membership is huge. Hundreds of thousands of people lifting billions of pounds, tens of millions of training sessions, billions of reps. And there's a data science team of PhD, very high end things that I get to partner with to ask all kinds of interesting questions about, hey, how do people train? Like real world observations, not RCTs. Like these are people free living in their lives that have choose to buy the device, but how do they use it? What associations and correlations can we find between people that use a lot or don't use a lot, people that make progress or people don't make progress? What are the things that we signals to find in there? Honestly, to help us design a better product and better programs, and the team that does that, and also to I personally have a very strong bias that resistance training and strength training is super important for the average population, not just for Olympic athletes. And I think more and more evidence has come out on the benefits of lifespan and health span and things like that. But not enough people do it. About a third of the Americans' population says they need resistance training or muscle strengthening exercises 2 times a week. And that's self-reported, and so it's probably a little high. And so only a third of people are doing it. So what can we do to honestly move that forward from a health awareness kind of point of view?
Yeah, I mean, when I heard about the product and some of the conversations I've had with you, it sort of feels like when you've got power data on a bike combined with GPS data in terms of the terrain, the incline, the gradients, alongside that power information, you've got a really, really good handle on what an endurance cyclist is doing. When it comes to go and do some resistance-based work, it's self-report, it's training diaries at best most of the time, and not always can you accurately quantify the workload, given that someone might not necessarily complete the rep or the set, or the technique might not necessarily be picked up, as well as you say, that encoding of the movement. We've produced that force or that strength, but what was the power? What was the manner in which it was delivered? So it feels as though that capture is extraordinarily complete.
Yeah, I hadn't thought about it within that context, but I think that's a really good parallel. I would add that I think it's really good. The piece we can also manipulate a variable like what the terrain is, what resistance is, in real time. And so if we notice that, hey, it's going up, we don't have to resolve. We can have that almost like an ergometer, like a go back to my lab-based days, but we can change that resistance in real time for everyone.
Right, fascinating. And so can you give us some of the big observations that you're making? And it would be good if you can at some point draw any distinctions between general population and any of the elite athletes that are using the unit for their sporting performance preparation at all. But I'm fascinated by some of these big ticket conclusions. Would you be able to take us through some of those?
Yeah, absolutely. And when you say conclusions, I would say these are observations.
Sure.
Again, not cause and effect correlation necessarily in terms of the data there, just to maintain my pseudoscientist, kind of things. I think some of the biggest things that we observe, the things that have been sort of most notable to me, is we have a lot of RCTs that are 8, 12, 16 weeks long that show, X population can make gains, make strength or hypertrophy muscle building gains. But they're very, very rarely at any level of fidelity beyond 16 weeks. That's like about as long it is. The vast majority of that research is in 18 to 25-year-old males that happen to be at university at the time, and particularly out of the US. But things. So I think some of the most interesting stuff are looking at long-term changes. Particularly, I'm interested in 45 now going on the active aging crew. I think the research evidence is very clear that people can gain strength and hypertrophy in their 50s, 60s, 70s. Josho Gurjik did a meta-analysis on that, use it or lose it. There's been 3 or 4 since then. But again, the body of research is very short term. What we see and we've been able to track is they make these consistent changes for much longer periods of time. We have not just big data, but longitudinal data over 6 years now. We only looked at a year in this particular state of strength report, but we're seeing like 75% increases in strength on mean with our 55 plus year old members over the first year on being tonal. So
mean being the average user.
Average.
So it could be that somebody's doing a very small amount of resistance-based work as well as a lot.
Yes. Yeah. You've got the mean workout date for that is like 2.4 times a week, but you have super users that are on 2-a-days, and you have people that have barely been on the device. The minimum threshold to be included in this was very low. What we wanted to report was the entire data set.
Did I see it was 3 minutes or something?
Yeah, it was something like that. I can't remember. It was like you had to have been on the device at least 3 times and for a total of 3 minutes or more or something. I wanted the entire, this is what it looks like.
Wow.
And so, so we do find that people that work out more make bigger gains. Not shocking, but do both, whether it's frequency or time of workout. Both of those have levers in terms of there, but just the mean is this huge increase. One of the data points in there, or it's not actually fully in the report, but a subsection of the data that you can't get everything into the data, but is the people that deadlifted once a week made huge 100+% increases in peak power, which I found super interesting. So they make these 75% increases in strength, but they actually make much larger increases in, let's say, deadlift peak power for the people that trained on a once a week basis, at least once a week basis. And in older populations. So activities of daily living, when we get in our 60s, 70s, frailty, sarcopenia, power becomes super important, of getting out of the chair, getting up the stairs, doing those activities. So we see even bigger increases, that probably that neurological component is more trainable or as trainable or more trainable than maybe the strength or hypertrophy. So we saw lots of really tough data on older populations. We saw our females lifting some big weights, like Ghana, the images hopefully of 2-pound dumbbell type things. People are lifting, and our female members particularly, lifting over 3,000 pounds of workout type thing on average means again. And then personally, one of the things there as I like to dive into is what is associated with greater exercise consistency. I've spent my early part of my career on the optimization side of the spectrum. How do I help the 99.9th percentile become 0.01% better? And that's a cool problem to solve, and I certainly enjoy doing that. What really motivates me now is not enough people exercise. Yeah. How can we help them as a general population do more of that? And so I don't really care what you do, cardio strength, hypertrophy strength, bicep curls versus fronts, just do something is better than nothing. And so what can we associate and what can we find in our data set about people that are consistent? What drives or what is associated with consistency over long periods of time? So simple things that we found, like time of day, having a consistency. These are not rocket science, but we show it in hundreds of thousands of people. Of consistency in training time is pretty important, or is a potential driver. Having relationships. We're a virtual platform, but engaging in the social platform, or checking your stats, or these other things that are associated with consistency.
Right.
I
Okay.
think have been really interesting.
That's fascinating. So can I just lean into a couple of those then? So
Sure.
time of day, so consistent. So that suggests that there's a program. It suggests that it's scheduled. The social aspect there, that feels like there's going to be some psychological kind of belonging.
Connectedness or relatedness. Yeah.
Right. Okay. So back to social determination and so on. Social, and the final one was checking stats. So there's a degree of engagement in terms of how am I progressing, and review. That's super fascinating. And are there aspects of tonal, or well, maybe just to keep it to tonal? Are there aspects of tonal that you're now then developing to encourage those?
Absolutely, yes. Those are things that, like, out of this data set that we will now lead into product development, both on a programmatic sense and like how do I progress in terms of those. But yeah, certainly in terms of feature development, those become items on our roadmap. It's not they automatically come to the top and you always get resource constrained and lots of people vying for those. But certainly those are the types of things that we would bubble up to become items on the roadmap. How do we reinforce that? How do we bring that more to the forefront? Yeah.
And so that's super interesting. But if I can go back to the deadlift comment, so big gains from big exercises is what I'm hearing. If I sort of zoom out and think about the take home for people that might be listening, would that be right? I mean, are you seeing a similar sort of effect with something equivalent like a squat, or a big muscle movement such as bent over row, for example?
Yeah, I think we looked at a whole bunch of those major compound movements, and we see this increase in power, more like a greater relative increase in power than in strength by people that just. And this is not a power program. This is not even a program. This is just what they did. If they deadlifted or they bench pressed on a fairly regular basis, I think it was once a week with a high level of consistency, we see these increases in power. The reason I like deadlift, particularly in the active aging community, it's such a functional movement, right? It's picking up your shopping,
Stuff up,
out of the car. It's lifting and carrying. I think Peter Attia, big longevity kind of things, talks about farmers walks. Well, that's kind of a similar kind of pattern. That ability to like move your mass and an additional mass out of that somewhat seated position to standing upright, just a super functional movement. And so that's one that I really like, is because it's a lot more practically relevant, I believe, into the real world. And we don't get to measure that in the research science very often. Most of the epidemiological or other research, it's hand grip strength, right, for strength measures. We don't generally on large scale be able to measure these highly functional movements. And so I like it from that side because it gives a perspective there. On the flip side, I will say just another tidbit of the data that didn't make it in. We see, and I think all of the epidemiological research says the same, that you kind of increase in strength in your 20s and you probably max out in your 30s, hold it on to your 40s, and then starts declining relatively quickly to about 70 and then drops like a stone. We see the same general pattern in the average tonal user, like just looking at them as a mass cohort of people. What we actually see is if we plot body weight against some of those, we actually see strength relative per body pound of body weight or per kilo of body weight actually maxes in 20 and then is on a slow decline all the time. That's not tonal users and using it. This is not the same person that's 20 that we're measuring at 30. We will eventually, and hopefully we reverse that. But looking at our 20-year-olds versus our 30-year-olds versus our 40-year-olds, because they get stronger between 20 and 30, but they put on more mass, they put on more weight, and they put on more weight continually. And so we have this kind of combination of, yes, you get a little weaker and you get a little heavier. So something like a deadlift becomes infinitely harder. So we show that we can reverse it, but we just look at the population as a snapshot of a couple of 100,000 Americans. And I would imagine it's fairly applicable across the world. Like, we get weaker pretty quickly, and it's significantly more than just the decrease in strength if you think about it per body weight.
And that's super interesting. And one of the key headlines I saw, despite all the benefits of lower body exercise, lifters are still skipping leg day. Now, you'll be pleased to know, Troy, I have got proper soreness because leg day was yesterday.
Nice.
But
I'm going to peak in another 24 hours. The DOMs will kick in severe.
You know what? Because I went heavy last week, and I think it wasn't. It's not. I lifted a little bit more yesterday, but I think I'm not going to be quite as sore because I was really limping about. And I've returned. I used to sprint, as you might know, but I've returned to strength training after sort of good long periods of time of endurance based work, and I'm mixing the two now. But it was great to see that because it's quite confronting. What are your insights as to why people are skipping leg day?
Yeah, it's undeniable in the data. So I think I don't have the report in front of me, so I'm pulling from memory. But I think when people get to choose their own free lifting program, they're only including a leg exercise once every 4 workouts or something, 25%, something around that. And so the data is, this is hundreds of thousands of people. It's undeniable. Why? We didn't measure that per se, but I certainly have my hypotheses from, being in our community, seeing the strength training kind of things. There is a mismatch between what people say is important to them and then what they are then choosing to do. So people overwhelmingly, one of the highest sort of metrics for us is healthy, long living. That's what our members want to do. But when they choose a free program, I think it's fairly consistent. Most people would agree that including leg exercises is probably more important for, as we talked about, activities of daily living, out the stairs, gait speed, those types of functions. But we still go back to curls and bench press as a default, particularly guys, less females, and less the truly older members than the younger members. And so why does that mismatch exist? I think it comes back to perception of effort. They're hard.
Okay. Yeah.
I think quite simply, I think people know it's important. I think it's perception of effort, and it's a motivator to not do it. It's easier to go into some curls, get a bit of a pump, check myself out in the mirror maybe if I've got a little muscle swelling, than it is to go and do a hard set of 10 squats or whatever it might be with to say 1 or 2 reps from reserve. That's not fun. It will create some soreness. It'll also during the exercise itself, and so I think we have to do that. So but what do we do about that? I think the approach that we're taking a lot within our programming, and we do program it a lot more frequently. Some of our numbers, push back a little bit, but is taking a lot of minimum effective dose research. I don't want to force you to do something you don't want to do. That's not good from an engagement.
That's probably counter to the consistency aspect as well. If you're enjoying your exercise and you keep them going, too many leg days might reduce adherence.
So I use a lot from the minimum effective dose research. Okay. And so Dr. Pack, there was a paper last year came out and kind of things. The minimum effective dose particularly for strength is pretty small. He's done one, in powerlift, it's 2, one heavy set a week and 2 or 3 back off sets and making significant gains. And you think about general population and what we can do, it doesn't take a lot. And so what we've started doing is in our programming, we'll have released a program, totally for the bros. It's called Ultimate Chest. And it's got 2 great chest days, highlight things. You hit it from every angle. You feel like Superman coming out of it. And it's got minimal effective dose for legs on 1 day. 1 day a week, research in frequency. Yes, frequency more often is better for strength, but we know for hypertrophy, frequency is not a huge driver of that. So 1 day a week, minimum effective dose, we get a little bit of what we need with a lot of what we like. One of the most successful programs on Tonal ever, because you start kind of doing. And so we leverage the research science to try and bring into the program, combining with what we see from our own data. Be one strategy.
No, I mean, I like that from the practical point of view. And if we put our performance hats on, I've felt that reality of applying science. You know, the example comes to mind is in spiritual muscle training. Try and get an athlete to do that for 40 weeks a year. They're not interested in doing that. Well, what's the minimum effective dose? Well, I've talked to Alison McConnell. She's saying really 6 to 8 weeks. Okay, I want you to do it in that 8 weeks prior to the competition season. And so it's positioning it from the reality of getting people to do the stuff they need to do.
Yeah, I think I've taken a lot from working with applied athletes in that's very bit my approach of like, I used to ask this question, or someone asked it of me. I can't remember, and I probably stole it from someone. Most of my quotes are stolen from someone, but they were like, "What? How do I succeed in this situation? It's not what is the best path. Like this, the fastest line, like point from A to B is a straight line, unless there's a bunch of obstacles in the way. Sometimes you need to smash through those. Most often, circumnavigating them is going to quickly get you to B. And it's kind of an approach I always took with athletes of like, what do I need to be successful? Not what is the perfect model, what is the perfect support system or the perfect physiology, but how do I make the most of this situation? And I think that's kind of the approach that I take. It's a very practical approach of like, hey, yeah, I'm going to do that. I'm going to give you that. I'm going to give you education. I'm going to try and say, hey, this is the value. This is the data. This is what's there. But I'm unlikely to change you, at least in the short term, with education alone. So let's give you something that is going to get you, at least the minimum that you need, while we try some of these longer form tactics of, okay, build up education or build up knowledge, kind of do these other things around that. And hopefully you'll, at some point in the future, want to engage in more in this. Or maybe not, and we'll still be okay.
Yeah, interesting. So fascinating to see what people are doing. And I love this from the reality of this is what people are doing, not controlled laboratory study. This is the reality of the patterns of behavior and the delivery with an increased interest in strength training. What are your thoughts? Big question, I know. What are your thoughts about where the fitness trends are going? I'm conscious of AI, I'm conscious of quantification, and people increasingly aware of their own health and longevity.
Yeah. I think like there is a tidal wave of strength training that is coming through and the value of it. And I think we're still on the front end of that. Cardio was the thing for longevity for, 20 plus years. Weights were for, bodybuilders and maybe some athletes. I think we're still on the front end of the public realizing. I think the research data is extreme. So I see that trend continuing. And I say strength training in all its forms, whether that's Pilates and more body weight resisted stuff, or traditional strength training in the gym, or tonal in your home. I think that is only a growing size of the market. And I think the ability of devices like Tonal to capture these enormous data sets and to meld them or augment your like LLMs or your generative AI models so you have this proprietary data set with this very open source data set. That's going to be a really interesting 3 to 5 years of the insights that you can bring greater personalization and individualization to training from a sort of, a scalable ability. I think that's really interesting. I think there's going to be a lot of advances in that. I do taper that with, we see the most successful fitness company, while they're not, maybe the darlings that they were a while ago, but like by any stage, is Peloton. They have, sold more bikes than any other fitness company in the history of the world. That, even though their market cap is not what they are, they still make $1 billion per year in revenue or something like that. No personalization, no individualization. It's all about group. It's about connectedness. And so I do think there's this balance that I'm really interested between how do we have this sense of community and doing the same thing at the same time with someone else? Because that's not personal necessarily. And I think it's going to be the intersection between those two of how, hey, I make this personal, but it's also group. And I think I don't necessarily have the answers of where that is going. I have some thoughts, some which are confidential, some that Tonal are working on. But I think that's going to be one of the secrets to get more people to exercise more frequently. Like the people that already exercise, we're going to carry on exercises. You will, bike ride or strength train. I will, do my thing until I die. It is what I do. We're not I'm a great customer. I'm not the person that you need to convince. And I think that's the interesting thing for the next 3 to 5+ years.
Yeah, super fascinating. It's like going out for a bike ride and then coming back and looking at your Strava stats and seeing what your mates have got up to that day. There's at least that knowledge of this is what I've done. What have you done? Let alone the classes. Hey, look, I'm going to have to invite you back, and we can have a further conversation about this, because how this transpires over the next 3 to 5 years, as you say, could be absolutely fascinating. We've got global health crises, but we've also got the opportunity to inspire people to learn from the best, but use performance sciences to inform whatever 1% better could be tomorrow. So I've really enjoyed the conversation. Thanks so much for coming on and sharing all your insights in leadership and this new frontier in personalized fitness. Thank you, Troy.
Thanks for having me on. I loved the conversation.
Hope you enjoyed today's conversation. If you did, please take a chance to press like and subscribe to the channel. And for audio, please do leave a review. Thank you.